What we have here are all of the pieces cut at 1.5 inches by 6 inches, and we've got 16 of them, enough for all the contacts on all the arrows. They reach across the screws that we've put into there, and so we're just going to be gluing them to the bottom of all the arrow panels, just across there, like that. So we need to peel off these protective pieces, clean it, and glue it for all the arrows. Okay, now I'm just going to spray adhesive onto the 4 strips. Okay, I've let it sit for a minute so the glue can get a little bit tacky, and then now we're just gonna set them on the plexiglass. We're gonna make it as even as we can across the top here. Like that. You can go ahead and stick all the rest of them down. Try not to get any of the glue onto the top of the sheet metal so that you can keep the sheet metal able to conduct very well. Okay, I've got all these glued down now. You can notice there's a little bit of glue coming out the sides. You don't have to worry about that too much. There is a bit of glue actually on top of the contacts, and I'm going to actually use something to scrape that off. And just go ahead and repeat that for all the rest of the panels. Okay, now that we have all the sheet metal contacts placed on the bottom of the plexiglass, we are ready to move on to soldering the board itself, the controller board. As for these, we still have to take the protective layer off of these and the bottom or the top of the actual panels themselves, but I wait until the last minute just to do that. And you should be able to see how these sheet metal contacts placed in here are going to cover those screws, so when they're pressed it's going to connect the 2 wires that are wired every other screw. Okay, this is the Mad Catz controller. It's a little more expensive, but I discovered when I used it, when I soldered to it, that it is so much easier to get the solder to stick on it. So I think it might be worth it to pay a little more for the controller. Alright, we're soldering the ground now. This is just a bundle of 8 wires because I've got 8. I've got up, down, left, right, select, start, X, and O. So I'm just going to solder all 8 of these grounds using 1 extra wire to the ground here. Okay, now we have most of the pad done. We got the controller soldered, but we don't have it in here yet. The next thing I want to do is get the button set up so that we can go, when we put the controller in, we can just solder everything all at once. Okay, so we need to take these two panels off so that we can put the buttons, so we can drill the holes for those buttons. Aim it down. Okay, this is the top right panel. We're going to be putting the push buttons, two push buttons in here, but when I took it off, I marked which way is up just so I don't get it confused, because when you drill the holes through here, they might not have been exactly the same on the bottom, so it's a good thing to keep track of which direction this panel is supposed to be. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and drill the holes for the push buttons. We're going to use a 1/2-inch drill bit. Okay, to mark where I'm going to drill for the push buttons, I put the ruler down, and from one screw hole to the other is approximately 9 inches. So I center the 9 inches between those two holes, and I'm going to mark at 3 inches and at 6 inches, and that's where I'm going to put my push buttons. Okay, so now I need to mark how far down into the solid panel I want to put the screws. So I'm going to put it about here at 1 inch. Okay, and same for the other one. Okay, here's the panel. I've marked it. I did mark it in permanent marker. However, if you use a dry erase marker over top the permanent marker, you can erase that. So once we put the holes, if there's still mark left, you can use the dry erase and you're able to erase it. Okay, here we are with the panel. I'm about to drill the holes for the push buttons. I'm going to do this with the panel actually on the pad, because I want to drill a little bit further into the 2x4, because these push buttons that I'm using, these are push buttons from Radio Shack. They are momentary single pole, single throw switches. Okay, if you'll notice, these push buttons are a little bit longer. They go just a little bit into the 2x4 if they were set on the panels. So we're going to have to actually drill the holes in the tops of these panels a little bit into the 2x4s. So this is why I'm going to leave the panel on the pad as I drill these holes. Okay, go ahead and drill. Now we have one hole, so go ahead and drill the rest of the holes. You can mark the ones on the other pad and drill those, and then we'll put the push buttons in and add some wires to them. Okay, what we have here are the holes that were drilled a little, from the plywood down into the 2x4, but the buttons are still going to have their wires connected to the bottom here, so you're going to need those to have a channel out from the hole. So I'm going to use a hacksaw to cut those. Okay, now we have the channels cut for the wires that we need, but there is a problem, and the problem is that the push buttons will go in there, but the nut to lock it down is not going to go on the back. So we need to widen the hole from the back in order to do that. Okay, now we're going to use a 5/8 inch drill to drill into the back of the plywood. Okay, so we need to brace it. Okay, so now we're about to drill the 5/8 inch screws, holes. This is going to wobble quite a bit because there's not a whole lot of wood behind the drill, but just keep it steady. Okay, so here are the holes after we've widened them. Okay, putting these push buttons in can require a little bit of finesse. You have to be able to use the sides of the plywood to keep the washers or the nut still as you tighten it. And it's tight. So there we are. Looks nice, doesn't it? Okay, you can see here that I made some marks with a permanent marker, and so I'm going to take that off using dry erase. I'm just going to mark over it, and now I should be able to erase it just by wiping it off. Neat! Okay, this looks like a mess, but actually it's just I'm connecting one of each of these to ground, as well as one of the wires from each of the wires to ground, and then the individual leads to each of one of the arrow wires, and one of all the button leads to their lead as well on the controller. And all this is just going to be, I'm going to organize it a little bit better, tape it together, make sure that the ends that are twisted are also taped, and add a little solder onto them as well, just to make sure that they don't come in twisted. So then you can just bind them all down and secure them within this, underneath here, within the underneath the panel, with some tape or some staples, and then you should be able to put your pad back together and test it out. Okay, our pad is all put together. We just need to test the arrows, get them working perfectly, and then we'll be able to drill the holes for the corner braces into the corners here and screw those screws down. Should be ready to go. So what we're going to do here is just go to the main menu, where you can just go up and down, like for instance here with the controller, up and down. But we need to test to make sure that that our pad will do the same. Okay, so we'll test down first. So because we have contacts along the sides, let's just push one side at a time. So we push up, and that seems to be pretty sensitive. We push down, push the right side. Seems alright. Left, it's not sensitive. This is probably because the screws are not quite all even. So we're just going to look at that in a minute, and we'll test down. And, well, okay. So we test down, and down doesn't seem to do anything either. Now let's test the up arrow. Okay, let's test right. Doesn't seem to do anything. Up, nothing.
You need to hit start.
Okay, left, nothing. The down part of the up arrow seems to work, but it seems a little quirky, so we're going to look into that too. Okay. Okay, so to get this bottom part of this bottom arrow working right, we're going to use this ruler and a screwdriver. We're going to put the ruler across the screws and look at it from the side and see if any of these are not quite reaching the arrow, or the ruler. And it looks like this one right here isn't all the way up. So we'll adjust it, and now it seems seems to contact, and I'm going to twist this one a little bit too. Okay, that looks better. Now let's try the left side. Okay, so we're looking at these screws, and it looks like the one all the way on the right is slightly too low, so we're going to back it out a little bit. Looks like we got it all even, so I'm going to put the panel back in and see if it works. Okay, it looks like we're closer on the left side. It's not quite as sensitive as I want it. And on the downside, looks pretty good. So we still need to adjust this one.
It looks like the top side of it is doing better.
Yeah, it looks like the top side is a little more sensitive, so it's probably something to do with the bottom part here. Okay, it looks like our arrow is working pretty well. However, you notice there is quite a bit of movement there. And I'd like there to be a little bit less movement, so I'm going to raise all the screws up a little bit. So we'll probably have to readjust after that. I finished tweaking the arrows and they all are pretty sensitive now. A couple things to note. When you press the arrow and nothing happens, then it's probably screws that are misaligned. They're not quite even with each other. If they do look really even and it's still not triggering, check the connection between the lines going around the screws. One of them may be loose, causing the other sides not to trigger at all. And then if you have an arrow that when you press it once it triggers multiple times, that is probably because one of the screws is slightly lower, and so it's giving a kind of it's barely triggering, so that the PlayStation interprets that as it triggering multiple times, and that's why you get those. So once you get the pad perfected, we can actually take the protective coverings off of the arrows and drill the corner braces in. Okay, now we're ready to drill. I put all the corner braces on, and we're going to use those as guides to know where to drill. You got a 1/8 inch drill bit on here, and here we go. And just do that for all the holes, and then you can put the screws in. Okay, the pad's done, working perfectly. Got all the screws in. I'll put some paper underneath the graphics so that they wouldn't be clear all the way through where the characters are. And so now we're just ready to play. Are you ready?